Welcome everybody to the Shebeen. I'm Barry Chandler. Welcome to the night live stream all about Irish whiskey. I'm looking forward to chatting with you about mash bills, Irish whiskey myths. We're going to talk about whiskey buses. We're going to talk about new whiskey releases. I'd love to know what's in your glass, but tonight we're settling in for a glass of Irish whiskey together in the place where we gather every Sunday night, and that's the Shebeen. You're all very welcome. Let me know what you're drinking, what's in your glass tonight. I've started off with a drop of Short Cross whiskey, peated single malt, collaboration with Stories and Sips. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We're going to talk about lots of different whiskeys tonight, from Powers Rye to Method and Madness, Rye and Malt, to Powers Gold, Killoan whiskey here. We've got lots that we're going to talk about, but I'm curious to know what you're drinking. If it's Irish, let me know. If it's not, go elsewhere. No, just let me know anyway. So it's been a busy week over the past week. Last time we did our live stream was 1 week ago, and it feels like a lot longer ago because that's when we released the details of our whiskey bus. We shared the itinerary. Anthony Sheehy and I came on from Anthony from Irish Whiskey Auctions, and we chatted about the itinerary for our next whiskey bus tour in August. And lo and behold, within 13-14 minutes of announcing it being open, all slots were already filled for our next whiskey bus tour of Ireland. We've got lots more details on that to share later, and I'll be back kind of filling you in on what's to be expected in terms of the next steps for those of you who are joining us. Really excited about it. If you're not joining us because you for whatever reason, time, family, work, etc., couldn't make this one, we'll have there'll be more we'll be able to report on in due course. Might hint on that a little bit later on. So evening to Amy and Julie and Greg, Jeff, Johnny, Mark, you're all very welcome. Bob, Matt, great stuff. Whiskey bus taster here from Irish Travels, Mike. He's got a drop of old Slane extra sherry wood. Very good. Good man, Mike. We had a good tasting there in Slane Castle for our last whiskey bus in August. Mark says the Short Cross Stories and Sips bottle had to be opened. Good man, Mark. I want to talk about that in a second before we dive into everything else tonight. A lot of people have been receiving their bottles across the United States, across Europe too, over the past week. And it's made for some really interesting conversations about peat, about single malts, about our club. And I want to dive into some of those because it's created some great conversation. Johnny McNally is sipping Redbreast Kentucky Oak. Good man. Those are harder and harder to find. I know they were snapped up on shelves when they when they were released in 2022, and I think we should see some more from that range. I think in due course as well. Gelston's 25 for Jeff and D. Great stuff. That's a serious whiskey there. 25-year-old single malt from Gelston's. Amy's about to have dinner. She's nothing in her glass yet. Sounds like an awful excuse now, Amy. Bushmills Black Bush for Matt. Good man, Matt. Great drop of whiskey. Maybe the best value blended Irish whiskey on the market. Bushmills Black Bush. Love it. Powers Rye for Julie. Great stuff, Julie. You found your bottles. Hit Ohio. Here's a litre bottle of it here. Compliments of Eric Ryan, for the distiller from Powers, yeah, who left it behind on his last visit here last week. We had a great launch event, or a Meet the Maker event for Powers Rye, which we'll talk about as well. Greg reminding everyone to hit the like button. Yeah, so if you just joined us, you're welcome to the Shebeen. We do this every Sunday night, and all we ask is that you hit the like button if you're enjoying it. If you're not, don't bother hitting it at all. And subscribe to our channel, our YouTube channel. Costs nothing. It's free. And we do these every week. Try and bring you closer to some of the stories that are happening in the world of Irish whiskey. Talk about interesting topics and discuss what's happening in our whiskey club as well. It's a chance, honestly now, it's a chance to keep me honest on a weekly basis to task so that I know what's coming up, that on a Sunday I have to report in and I have to let people know what you're getting for your club subscription, what's coming next, what we're working on, what's happening in the world. So it kind of keeps me as honest as hopefully it keeps you entertained and maybe sometimes educated as well. So it's a bit of crack every Sunday night. Just hit the like button. That's all we ask. Hey, Kristen, joining us from Rochester. Great stuff. Bill is sipping on a Teeling 18-year-old Renaissance. There's a serious whiskey there. And Dave coming in with another serious whiskey. Dunville's 20-year-old PX. Fantastic. Keith is very jealous of the Whiskey Bus people. I know it's a bit of a conundrum for us. Do we run more than one bus, or do you make it this one kind of thing that when it's gone, this ephemeral thing? And it's worth addressing, because we've got some messages from people saying, well, why don't you just run two buses? And we've had this conversation at length, Anthony Sheehy and I, why we can't run two buses, or why we've decided not to run two buses. There's a couple of reasons to it. One is, the first thing is, a bus already is bringing 40, 45 people between attendees and hosts, etc., and guides to each location. Ireland is full of small buildings. It's not got big buildings, small distilleries, small buildings, small bars. So we don't tend to have huge capacity to rock in with 80, 90 people at a time. 40 or 45 is hard enough. For many experiences in Ireland, you need much smaller groups than that. So I think we're at capacity in terms of enjoying a group, enjoying an experience with a group size. And the second thing we thought of is, okay, well, why don't we run two buses, and they run kind of alternate days, where one day alternating with the other. So every second day, like the buses on a Monday, bus A is here. On a Tuesday, bus B is there, and vice versa. But the challenge of that is that everybody might not get a chance to meet up and hang out. And I think one of the secret sauces, or one of the great takeaways from last year, was the crack that we had, because we were all, whether we liked it or not, stuck with each other for a week during the day on the bus, and we'd hang out, go out to a bar or a restaurant at night, or go back to the hotel and sit in the lobby and chat. There might have been an old song or two along the way, and that tended to make the experience. So we're sticking with the one bus per itinerary for now, but what we will do is work on the next whiskey bus for March already. So we're already planning West Coast, Wild Atlantic Way. Maybe that's Donegal, Galway, Clare, Dingle, if we're brave enough, if we're willing to hop around and have that much travel. But there's enough of Ireland to be seen that we could do multiple buses a year, so long as there's enough interest in people joining us. And I know there's some people who work hard in the summer months that can't join us when we do a bus in August. And there's some who work hard in March who can't make it work, who can only join in August. So we know we're going to always have something for somebody, and we're always going to let somebody down. But the best we can do is try and strike a balance, and hopefully we'll get more of you on experiences over the coming months and the coming years as well, because we have no intention of slowing down on the travel and the tourism side of things. Ted from DC checking in. McConnell's in the glass. Good man. There's Jeff Cleveland. Hiya, Jeff. How are you? Opening up his stories and sip short cross whiskey. Great stuff. Steve, the Smathers is there, our trusty Facebook group administrator, still deciding what to pour. MP's got Jameson Gold. Good stuff. Great choice. Kristen's not feeling great, but making a hot whiskey with the short cross. All right. Report back on that. Tom says, my wife retires in 2024. I told her about the whiskey bus heading for the Wild West. She's in. All right. Good stuff. That's the first couple of folks so signed up for the Wild West. Let us talk a little bit about, selfishly, I want to address it because many of you are Stories and Sips Whiskey Club members. This is our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club collaboration release we did with Redemption Estate Distillery. This is our short cross whiskey, single cask, 300 bottles, double distilled, peated single malt, aged for 6 years and 10 months in a European oak cask that previously contained cognac and orange liqueur. It is double distilled, 180-hour fermentation, super fruity, lots of chocolate notes, dark chocolate, milk chocolate, orange, citrus, mint, menthol, peppermint coming through. Very, very different whiskey. You as club members, I have to congratulate you on rolling the dice, because this is not just our first whiskey release with Redemption Estate and with Shortcross. It's the first ever peated whiskey that we've released. And if you'd asked me 6 months ago if I would have considered a peated whiskey for our club, I would have said 100% no, selfishly, because I wasn't that into peat, and I was kind of going along on my own journey to try and understand whiskey a bit more, chasing flavor, listening to those who know far more than I do about whiskey, and trying to understand what I'm looking for, where flavors come from. And I hadn't yet reached that point in my journey where peat was a thing. My wife, on the other hand, way ahead of me. Long before I met her, she was a Scotch whiskey drinker. She enjoyed whiskies from Islay, really enjoyed peated whiskies. She loved Bruichladdich whiskies. She loved Port Charlotte. and she was well ahead of me. I wasn't there for a long time. It was only in August, and on our last whiskey bus, incidentally, that I finally tripped over peat in a good way and found myself headfirst in a big pile of peated turf. And I wasn't a peated malt, and I wasn't unhappy about it. I've thanks to David Stewart, one of our club members and our group members, who drinking Octomore in the Temple Bar pub. I had the big bottle, big black bottle in front of him, and I asked him, what are you drinking there? And he said, Octomore. I said, great, I'll have an Octomore. And I just went for it and really enjoyed it and thought, you know what? I'm finally ready for peat. So when we decided to release, when we 3 days later, incidentally, we went to Shorecross Whiskey at Redemon Estate. David and Fiona Boyd Armstrong took care of us. And the last whiskey we tasted was this whiskey. It was an unreleased sample from a selection of casks that they had no idea what they were going to do with. Peated whiskey, their first ever batch of peated whiskey, maturing away. David wasn't sure if it was going to see the light of day. We tasted it and said, wow, the flavor is unbelievable. Long story short, we got to release this as our club whiskey, thanks to David and Fiona's kindness and generosity in allowing us access to this cask. And it's been a really interesting journey because it has caused us to talk about peat in a way that we wouldn't historically have talked about, mostly because I'm 98% responsible for the content and the programming and the events that's coming out of the club. And so if I wasn't into peat, you were all suffering and not enjoying peat. Now that I'm into peat, you're all suffering because I'm into peat. But why I wanted to bring this to market after a lot of deliberation, a lot of conversations with many of you, was that I felt that a club should not have something that everybody enjoys all the time, but enough of a selection that allows us to explore and expand our palates and try things that we might not up to that point have tried. And so by releasing this whiskey, that's what we did. The one goal was to introduce new flavors that we had never tried before. And I know 100% we've achieved that. Whether those are flavors that everyone can take or not, well, that's a different story, and really not something I expect everyone to take to. Just like I don't expect everyone to take to a Powers John's Lane or a Redbreast Kentucky Oak. I think everyone's got a spectrum of flavors that they're in a profile range that they're comfortable within, and outside of that, it might take a while because there's so many good things within their range. Why would they ever move outside of it? I was one of those people. I was asked for the longest time, why don't you try peated whiskies? And I said, because I haven't yet got through all that are within the range I like. But now that this has gone out there and landed, we're seeing folks open the bottles already. It's created a really interesting conversation. And I want to address some of the points that have been made really well in our group about this peated whiskey. Many of you, and I congratulate you again, who ordered this. And incidentally, we still have some bottles available of this. And I'm quite happy I think we've got 45 bottles out of the 300 still left. They're sitting on the shelf and they'll stay there until the people who really want to will reorder it again. And that's, I think, how it should be done. Those of you who ordered it not being already on your peated journey, congratulations. Like, you took a step, you spent money on something, and you trusted that we were going to bring you something new and different. And some of you have suddenly become peated fans because of it. And others of you have said, you know what? It's different. It's not, I'm still not there, but I appreciate kind of the journey, or I tried it. I said I'd try it. It's not for me. And that's the beautiful thing about it. I know those who don't want to finish their bottle will find plenty of people to help them. And those that do want to finish theirs will be ordering again. Couple of things about this whiskey. We have a tasting scheduled for March 2nd with David and Fiona Boyd Armstrong, the owners of Redemon Estate. David is the distiller, and they'll walk us through how to enjoy it properly. Many of you haven't waited, and that's perfectly fine. I haven't waited either. But it's worth noting while we're waiting for this tasting, and the tasting is a chance for us to perhaps have the distiller lead us on how to best enjoy it. Now that we're opening it up, there are some learnings that I've had along the way from you and from my own experiences with this whiskey. This is a 66% ABV whiskey. And sometimes we're very quick to say, oh, it doesn't feel like a 66% ABV whiskey. Or we'll taste a cask strength whiskey and we'll say, oh, I don't get the heat or the spice or the burn. It's so smooth, or I get the flavors, which is great. And congratulations. However, we're doing ourselves a disservice by not allowing this whiskey to meet water. It would love to meet water. It would be very happy to meet water. In fact, it'll take a lot of water on board. You could go so far as to reduce this 50-50 water and whiskey and not even get close to removing the flavor notes. And I would experiment with, if I was you, take 50 milliliters of this, pour it into a glass, and drop by drop, bring it down, bring it down, bring it down until you get to almost equal parts whiskey and water, and you'll notice a completely different whiskey. It takes water, okay? So one of our goals with the club is when we're releasing whiskeys is not to release cask strength whiskeys, it's to release distiller strength whiskeys. In other words, let the distiller tell us at what ABV it should be. Who am I to know? Who are you to know? We're not whiskey experts. We're just drinkers. We're enthusiasts. We want the experts to tell us. And cask strength is always a bit of it's a tough one because it masks what's the really the optimum ABV the whiskey should be at. So bring it down with a bit of water. Try it, taste it, and leave it open up a little bit. It'll sit for 10, 15 minutes without water. Add your water after that. Sip. Try again. Add water. Sip. It really changes the whiskey. It brings more of the chocolate notes out, brings more of the citrus notes out, and it reduces some of that spice. And it allows some of the quite light smoke, I would argue, to come through. It's not a heavily peated whiskey by taste, but 55 parts per million malted peated barley, which is, it's not low, but it's it ended up about 38 ppm, I think, by the time it got into the bottle. So that's what I want to say about this, is that congratulations for trying it. You're to be celebrated for being club members who are willing to risk a bit of money on something that you don't know yet. And some of you now have found new flavors. And I compare my journey to peat to my journey to Redbreast. I spent the first 2 years of my whiskey journey thinking Redbreast was too harsh for me. Now, some of you are laughing, going, harsh? I mean, it's like water to me at this stage, you might say. But I think we have this journey to go on and growth that our palate must go through. Jameson Black Barrel was as far as I could go for a while when I was drinking Irish whiskey. And eventually, Redbreast, by accident, I sampled it and thought, I'm after wasting 2 years of my life. I should have been drinking Redbreast all the time. And now, 7 years later, now I'm on to peated whiskeys. So I think there's a journey. Some of you may decide you never want to get there, and that's fine. I had decided the same thing. Others of you will say, I will get there, or I don't want to get there. Whatever it is, I don't want to take this too seriously. It's whiskey, right? This is not rocket science. It's not, nobody's life is in danger. I think we could maybe overcomplicate this. If you like it, congratulations. If you don't, thanks for trying. Bottom line, really. All right. I'll take a sip now while I read your comments. But fair play to you all. I'm going to scroll way back. Bob's been having a fun time the past few days with a 66% ABV. Another way to look at it is that when you buy this whiskey, you're buying whiskey, not water. You can add your own water to it, Mike wants to know if there's any bottle number 1 yet. So one of our little promotions was that we offered up that if anyone gets bottle number 1 and opens it, we'll refund the cost of the whiskey. I'm not a big emotionally attached person to bottle number 1. I don't need to own it myself. And I think that you're the whiskey club. If you happen to get it randomly, more power to you. If you drink it, even better. So he said, look, if somebody gets number 1, open it up. Lots of you claim to have number 1 with clever finger placements over the label and some dodgy Photoshop jobs and some masking tape stuck on labels. And then one that looks remarkably like it could be number 1. We foolishly didn't record who got number 1. So we're relying on the honesty and trust. So we think we have one person who has number 1, but we're going to give it a week and wait and see. Some more still traveling. Mark says the nose on the short cross is the most amazing I've ever nosed any Irish whiskey. I couldn't argue with that. It's absolutely incredible. It's Terry's chocolate orange meets a little puff of smoke, and it's just incredible on the nose. D says short cross, Stories and Sip short cross is amazing. 40 odd bottles left in the store, folks. You've got the links to it if you're club members. If you're not, you can join our club on storiesandsips.com. It's not too late to get a bottle. John is finally catching up. Good to see you, John. Welcome. Crack him some Redbreast 12. Matt says it took him a while to get into peat as well. Brookladdy Scotch was his gateway into balanced peat flavors. Update from Kristen. Short cross in a hot whiskey is delightful. She may be cured. Look, medical advice from our club. I would take this medical advice for all that it's worth. Amazing. Kristen's cured. No more doctors or trips to Lourdes needed. Anthony Jones loves peat and loves this. Great stuff. Delighted to hear that. The water totally changes the drink. Couldn't believe it. Yeah, so I have it here, and I have added, I think I would say it's 1 part 1 part whiskey to like half a part water. So I've brought it way down, and it does change it. And I gave it to a few people during the week to try, who I would respect their opinion of in the whiskey industry. They had remarkably complimentary things to say about it, but all of them recommended adding water, not and in fact saying like you're doing yourself a disservice by not exploring the flavors that are available to you at those lower ABVs. Tyrone says I actually enjoy the silky. Lots of peat in that one. Yeah, so great. That's a great range to get introduced to silky as well. You've got your red silky, you've got the traditional, just the legendary silky, and you've got the legendary dark silky, and you've got midnight silky as well, which is even more peated, which has found its way in a higher cask strength, or higher strength, that's made its way to the United States as well. All right, so that's just something I wanted to touch on with this. We can talk more about it if you have any questions. Again, it's available to our club members. If you're not yet a club member, we'd love to have you. We tend to do a lot of things. All right, so today I want to talk, this evening, I wanted to talk about a few things that are directly and indirectly related to everything that's going on between our club whiskies and our whiskey boss and things like that, and just the growth in Irish whiskey generally. And last week, how long ago? 2 weeks ago, not even 2 weeks ago, we had a great event at the Dead Rabbit in New York. And we hope to have many more events at the Dead Rabbit in New York in 2023. But on our event, one of our whiskeys was Method and Madness Rye and Malt. And it's just being launched in the United States at the moment. And it's a mixed mash bill whiskey. And it raised a lot of questions at the time. And I know we're starting to see more and more unusual, non-traditional, whiskeys that we're not maybe familiar with the makeup of their recipes. And so tonight, I want to talk about mash bills a little bit and explore them, answer some questions on them, address some questions that were raised earlier at that event and in the group, our Facebook group, in the past week. So we'll talk about mash bills, and we're also going to do a little bit of myth busting. One of the most enjoyable parts of being a whiskey enthusiast / evangelist is when I get to talk to groups, is to try and get an understanding of their level of knowledge of Irish whiskey. And oftentimes we get great myths shared with us that become cast in stone knowledge or truths for many people. And it's not that we don't want to burst anyone's bubble or in any way ruin the experience of Irish whiskey, but rather perhaps help introduce people to the truths behind Irish whiskey, so that these pervasive myths can in time disappear, and we as Irish people don't have to listen to these myths that are foisted upon us sometimes, and often always with good intention. And so we celebrate anyone celebrating Irish whiskey or having some knowledge of Irish whiskey. But I want to address some of the myths that we hear, and it won't take very long. 7 or 8 of them we'll talk about. So we'll talk about the myths of Irish whiskey. We'll talk about some mash bills. We'll talk about Whiskey Bus. And we'll talk about, then at the end, we'll talk about our upcoming next tasting event and our next quarterly tasting event. So we'll talk about our club whiskey event with David and Fiona Boyd Armstrong from Shorecross. And we'll talk about an event we're going to reveal on Friday, which is a very exciting event indeed. Kristen said, you guys put on an amazing event. Well done. Thank you. It was a very enjoyable event, I have to say. Very enjoyable. All right. So I see some of you are already in there ordering whiskeys. Fantastic. Well done. Okay. So let me pull up an old slide or two here. Myth, there is still a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, says Tyrone. No, you're right. It's gone. We drank it. We ate it and drank it. This is the only gold here now that's left. All right. Anyway, keep me posted on what's in your glass. Always fascinated to hear. Give the video a like. If you're enjoying the crack, just hit like and subscribe. That's all we ask of you. All right. I want to talk first about Irish whiskies and their new releases. There is really just one big release at the moment that's rolling out across the United States, and I put it up here tonight because it launches and arrives on a very limited number of shelves tomorrow in Ireland, and many of you will be already familiar with it, and that is Powers Rye. Right here, Powers Rye. There it is. This is the newest release from Powers Irish Whiskey. It is a left of field release, a left of yeah, we didn't expect this, we didn't see it coming. It is 100% rye mash bill, no other grains at all used in it. Irish rye, grown in Wexford, 100% Irish rye, distilled in column stills, aged for between 4 and 5 years, and bottled at 43.2% ABV or 86.4 proof. And this is the newest release. It's a very affordable whiskey in that it is priced in and around a couple of dollars more than Powers Gold label, wherever you see Powers Gold label. So I would expect for a 750ml bottle, you should be paying $30 to $40, depending on your state, which is quite affordable. It hits the market tomorrow in Ireland for €40. It's a big deal in the world of Irish whiskey because never before has there been a 100% rye whiskey released. If you're part of our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club and you didn't get a chance to join us live on Thursday, where we had the distiller, Eric Ryan, sitting right here beside me, right here, you can catch up on that entire event, 1 hour, 50 minutes on our website, storiesandsips.com. We have a recording of it, a replay. You can watch that at your convenience. And Eric shares the history of Powers. He shares the history of the evolution of innovation through the original Powers Johns Lane distillery all the way through to the current distillery, Middleton in County Cork. Talks about production, talks about the challenges, talks about how it's made, why it's made, when it'll be made again, distribution, etc. Very high in demand already in the United States, selling out very quickly. Everything that has been allocated to the United States apparently has been assigned to stores. The distributor's already looking for the next batch. Very small amount of it available in Ireland tomorrow, but it is a core release, which means it's going to be more available in the coming months. But again, these things take time. Middleton Distillery has been replanting or recontracting rye growing from that same farmer every year and increasing the quantities since 2016. So there'll be more coming, but if you see it on the shelf and you're interested in it, I think it's pretty affordable whiskey. I would go and grab it. I did a little side-by-side comparison with Powers Gold. Some of you said earlier today, some of you are wondering, why is he comparing to Powers Gold? It's nothing like it. Well, they're similar price points. They're entry-level whiskies. They're not a pot still whiskey. Traditionally, there's a blend and a rye. I thought, let's put them up against one another because I think there's going to be some comparisons. For me, the Powers Rye is the winner. Flavorful all day long, beats the Powers Gold. So for me, it's a win. It's a win. All right. Johnny's looking forward to getting his hands on it. Kristen said they killed a bottle and a half in the pub in about 3 days. The staff may have had a small influence. I'd imagine. Tyrone, I have no experience with Canadian Rise, so I wouldn't be able to tell you. I'd be the wrong person, but there might be people in our audience who have more experience with Canadian Rise, and they'll be able to help you with that. Brian says, going to need a lot more coming to the US. Couldn't agree more. I think two things are in the favor of this whiskey. One is that it's Irish whiskey, and that is, of course, in a fantastic growth curve and has been for the last 15 to 20 years in the United States. And the second thing is it's a category that's well known in the United States. It's a rye whiskey. And that is, there's already educational barriers broken down. And I think that's going to be very, very helpful. So I think this is going to go very fast. And if I was to add in a little bit of a cynical bit of paddywhackery, an old green label on an Irish whiskey doesn't always hurt. So the old St. Patrick's Day, green, Jameson's a green bottle. All right. Bob says he sees it's available at the favorite whiskey shop, Julio's. It's a good store. Pick it up tomorrow. Good man. All right. So that's a release. That's the only release we're talking about at the moment. Others of you may have seen, or some of you may have seen that of late in the last week, Middleton Very Rare's social media channels have been teasing the corners of boxes and hinting that there is a new release coming from Middleton Very Rare for 2023. So stay tuned on that. And we might have more news to share with you soon. They may have hinted at a new box, new packaging. We won't say much more other than I don't think you'll be disappointed. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Does the oh yes, the Dead Rabbit does have Powers Rye. Yes, they do. They last week they had just received it and it wasn't yet on the menu, but Powers Rye is in there. It is definitely in the building, so I believe it's on the shelf by now. Okay. A little bit of Irish whiskey news, which we'll share here. So that was the only. Hi, Cheryl. Welcome to the chat tonight. What's the crack? What's the crackaroo? I'm going to put this up full screen, make it a little bit bigger. So, in Irish whiskey news, really just one thing to report on, and that's news from Irish distillers, producers of Powers Rye, Middleton Very Rare, Jameson, etc. And they shared record growth figures for the last 6 months of 2022. Why is that important for us to know? Well, it might explain why sometimes we can't find some whiskies on shelves, is because the growth has gone through the roof. Jameson sold 6.4 million cases, an increase of 11% in on the first half of 2023. So the second half, they increased their sales by 11%. And their sales in the US exceeded 2.5 million cases full year 2023. But most interesting to us is that their prestige portfolio. And I say most interesting to us is because most people who tend to tune in here tend not to just sip on Jameson alone. They tend to find their way up through the categories into spot whiskies and red breasts and Middleton Very Rares and such exotic things as that. In any case, demand for those whiskies has ballooned, rocketed, any word you want to use to describe what's going on there. 38% growth in the spot range, 20% growth in the red breast range, 50% growth in Method of Madness, 45% growth in Middleton Very Rare, and 39% in Napo Castle. And then Powers, 68% sales growth, which is pretty amazing. So these are good numbers, and we should be quite excited that that demand is out there, while simultaneously knowing that in a free market economy with free market capitalism, the market dictates prices, and demand may reduce availability and reduce supply and driving up prices. So whiskey's not going to get any cheaper. When you have results like this from any distillery, let me tell you, whiskey's not going to get any cheaper. Whether you decide to keep buying whiskey that gets more expensive is a subjective personal decision that I can do nothing about. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. When it comes to the price of whiskey, I am not happy with the price of any whiskey that I choose to drink. In other words, all the whiskey I like is more expensive than I would like to pay for it. Simple as that. All right, let's talk about some Irish whiskey myths. Let me have a little sip on water first. No, these are 2022 numbers, Mike. 2022. It's the end of 2022. Price of all the spots in red breast has skyrocketed. It has. It has. All right. I'm fighting a head cold, but I'm fighting. All right. These will be pretty lighthearted, folks. These myths. Again, I don't want to take whiskey too seriously, but we do hear some things over and over again, and we just would rather that they weren't talked about and that we actually address the truth rather than the myth. So here's the first one. Irish whiskey is smooth because it's triple distilled. Now, we, the Irish, have ourselves to blame for this. You'll see a little ad there from Old Bushmills, poetry in every smooth sip. And if you were to pull up advertising materials from the 1960s, 1970s onwards for Irish whiskey, which at the time would have been Jameson, would have been Powers, would have been Tullamore Dew, as they tried to grow international sales, export sales, you would have seen a lot of mentions of smooth. And there's a reason for that. It was decided at the time that because of the prevalence of Scotch, because of the market penetration, the awareness of Scotch, that Ireland's unique selling point and the 1960s, when it came to whiskey, was not its flavor, was not its character, was not its profile. Its unique selling point was simply that it wasn't Scotch. This led us to talk about smoothness and led us to talk about things that are just mellow and smooth, as if there was no character, no profile, no nuance, no anything to the whiskey. Now, maybe there wasn't as much as there is today back then, but I would argue we probably did the distillers a disservice by watering down the advertising like we water down the whiskey a little bit. So we went out to the world telling the world that the whiskey was smooth, and it's something that has stuck. And it's almost now it almost feels like a badge of honor when you get to taste an Irish whiskey, or somebody who's maybe not used to whiskey has already, before they sip on the whiskey, an impression that it's going to be harsh and somehow rip the throat out of their mouth and drop it in the ground in front of them, that they'll be staring at it. And if anything more positive than that happens, or anything slightly less dramatic happens, then they get to say something like, "Oh, that's very smooth," as if it didn't kill me. And that's an awful, awful indictment, I think, of Irish whiskey today, because I think Irish whiskey is far more than not Scotch, and it's far more than smooth. Water, you might argue, is smooth. Then again, can a liquid be smooth? The table here is smooth, you know. Can a whiskey be smooth? But so we kind of fight that word a lot in the whiskey world because it does a disservice, I think, to the nuance of the flavor profile. But we've ourselves to blame. Now, so this is kind of a two-part myth. The second is because it's triple distilled. So tour guides are great to use this argument that triple distillation smooths out the whiskey or makes it more mellow. It's not completely untrue in the sense that distillation is just the concentration of flavors, and the more times you distill it, the higher the concentration of alcohol, and the more you'll strip out some elements that don't get carried forward from one still to the next. So you might argue that by the third distillation, sufficient things have been removed that would have been considered harsh. But again, there's no one rule for that, and every still will be different in fermentation and distillation times and what have you. So it's a myth, Irish whiskey being smooth because it's triple distilled. So kind of a two-part thing there. I'd like to avoid the word smooth if at all possible. Mellow is another version of that, but we can probably, as whiskey fans, go deeper than, oh, it's very smooth. But I acknowledge why people, because the historical nature of whiskey is it might kill you. And if it doesn't, it's smooth. We've ourselves to blame. Ourselves to blame. As simple as that. Kristen says, I forget a hot whiskey. I should get a hot whiskey. All right. Next up, what's our next myth? Irish whiskey is all low proof. Well, I think our Shortcross 66% ABV, 132 proof changes that narrative very quickly. Now, there is a big portion of the American whiskey drinking community that looks at Irish whiskey as being Jameson. And rightfully so, because for most of the last half century, Irish whiskey has been predominantly Jameson. Look, it's still predominantly Jameson and will remain predominantly Jameson for a long, long time. But there's far more to it. Now, Jameson is a budget entry-level whiskey that is bottled at 40% ABV, much lower than many bourbon drinkers would like a whiskey, or rye drinkers or Canadian drinkers. But because Jameson is so prevalent, because Jameson is to many Irish whiskey, then the natural association is that Irish whiskey is low proof. The only reason that Irish whiskey is low proof like that is because in an attempt in the 1960s and 70s to expand the market for Irish whiskey globally, Irish whiskey had to meet the demands of the palates at the time. And the demands of the palates at the time were not for harsh, robust, high-proof whiskies from Ireland. It was rather for a more well-rounded, approachable whiskey that could be enjoyed by more than just your very depthful whiskey drinker. So it had to have a broad mass appeal. 40% is the lowest you can go on ABV to make that happen. Anything lower than that, and you've got a liqueur. You can't call it a whiskey or a spirit drink. So 40% is what Jameson went to the market at, and has remained so ever since. Now, only in the past few years has the tide shifted, because now we're finding that whiskey drinkers who historically would not have looked at Irish whiskey have started to turn their eyes and ears and noses to Ireland, and they've discovered new flavors through the promotional efforts of the likes of Redbreast and Spot whiskies and Bushmills and Killowen and all of the Dingle whiskey and so many great distilleries around the country. So today we have, there's more than 100 whiskies that would be north of 50% coming out of Ireland, and more to come. But they'll only be released when there's a market for them, in the sense of it's an expensive process releasing a high-proof whiskey, because the duty owed to the Irish government if you sell a whiskey in Ireland goes up probably about €2-3 a bottle for every 1% point you go above 40%. So, for example, when we released this whiskey, about $45 of the cost of this bottle has gone to the government. So when you think about how little remains, how little margin there is in whiskey, we brought this to market at $99.95. 45 of that went to the government, which is astonishing. Imagine that, 45 went to the government. That's before fulfillment costs, shipping costs, etc. So the higher up you go in ABV, the more expensive it is. But expect to see a lot more coming out. I'd like to see distillers releasing distillers cuts, blenders cuts, their chosen ABV, not just the standards 40, 46, and then cask strength, but maybe someone says, you know what, 53.89 is where this works best for us. Let's go with that. And I think at a small scale, we'll find a market for that. There was a little article I posted in our Facebook community and on the Stories and Sips Facebook page, which is public, last week, about where 40% came from. Why is that the ABV that whiskies are at? And it's all thanks to a Welshman, David Lloyd George, former Chancellor of the Exchequer in the United Kingdom, and then eventually Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who during the Second World War during the First World War in 1915, he introduced the Immature Spirits Act, which set whiskey ABV at 40% after negotiation with the drinks industry and the spirits industry. He wanted to be a lot lower, but there was a back and forth that happened because he was a non-drinker. He was a teetotaler, and he wanted the elimination of spirit drinking and whiskey drinking. He thought it was a demon drink. Especially, he thought during the war, we don't want people drunk. We want people doing their effort, doing their bit for the war effort. And so he was trying to eliminate as much as he could and put really harsh penalties on producers, which caused a couple of things to happen. One was the offering up by the drinks industry of a 3-year maturation period minimum, which appeased him a little bit because it meant that spirits, it would take longer to get to market. It would only ensure that those companies who had facilities to age whiskey were large enough would be able to produce it. It would get rid of a lot of the small producers. And then also they introduced this idea of like 43% ABV, eventually got negotiated down to 40%. So the 3-year minimum aging, the 40% ABV are all down to political games with David Lloyd George in 1915, and they've stuck ever since. And it's because most of the world's spirits laws are kind of derived from those old British laws. Ireland's part of the United Kingdom at the time. Canadian law, American were kind of all inspired by it. That's how it's stuck. And so it's still there to this day. So there's no flavor reason why whiskey should be 40%. None whatsoever. There's no flavor reason why whiskey should be 3 years aged. It's all political, as many things are. Myth number 3, Irish whiskey must be aged for 3 years and a day. How many times have you heard this on a tour? And how many times have you been told it's because the Scots only age theirs for 3 years and we're one day better? A myth of the highest order, let me tell you. 3 years and a day is not the truth at all. In fact, it is very clearly enshrined in European law what the minimum age for whiskey is. And I told you that it goes all the way back to 1915 in the Immature Spirits Act. That has gone on to be enshrined in various ways in Irish law, post Irish independence, eventually into European law in the 1980s, and then updated more recently, I think in 2004. But Irish whiskey must be aged for 3 years. And how do we know that? Well, it's actually written quite clearly here in the Irish whiskey technical file, which is part of European law. And it says that Irish whiskey, and again, these are the 3 phrases for how you can call or spell Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey with an E, Uisce Beatha Éireannach, or Irish whiskey without the E, must be matured in wooden casks, such as oak, only on the island of Ireland, such maturation being for a minimum of 3 years. So that's it. That's the technical file. That's the legal document. You can't, any spirit up to that point is called just a spirit drink or new make spirit. But 3 years is it. 3 years in a day, it's cute. It's not true. It's a myth. Get rid of it. Sick of it. All right. What other myths have we got? Myth number 4. Here's a good one. Irish whiskies have a religion. How many times have we heard Bushmills is Protestant, Jameson is Catholic? And for some reason, people think a religion is a slur. Who do we have to blame for this? We've got Hollywood to blame for this. We've got TV shows like The Wire to blame for this. We've got passed down tropes and kind of truths that are. It's an Irish American thing. It's not something we hear in Ireland, but we hear it a lot in the United States that I wouldn't touch a Protestant drinker, I wouldn't touch a Catholic drinker, or whatever it is the opposite persuasion is, as if it's some kind of slur to be a certain religion. In any case, Irish whiskies don't have any religion. Irish distilleries may be located in areas that have higher percentages of certain religions. But the last time I saw a bottle of whiskey, it didn't have a rosary beads around its neck or have a miraculous medal on its chest. It's just not a thing, and it's a myth, and we don't talk about it in Ireland. In fact, in Ireland, you'd be kind of talked sternly to if you were to bring that up, I think, in conversation, that you thought Irish whiskey had a religion or anything like it. There are so many examples throughout drinks history of different religions, and different leaders and founders of companies of different religions. Like, for example, I've often found whiskey drinkers who say, I'm not touching Bushmills because that's a Protestant whiskey. And also, give me a pint of Guinness. And a pint of Guinness, I mean, no Catholics were allowed to work at Guinness for many, many years. These things get lost in translation, and the truth is always a little bit more difficult to understand or stomach than the easily shared trope. I think this one should be put to bed. There are distilleries in different areas. There are distillers of different religious backgrounds, and who cares? Who cares? Is the whiskey good? Do you take care of your people? Do you pay your people? Are you a good person? That's all I care about, honestly. All right. So if we hear that being thrown around in the whiskey bus, there'll be a sidecar attached to the whiskey bus for any offenders, and we'll throw them into the sidecar. It'll be the side of the bus that is closest to the other lane of traffic. So it'll be a bit precarious, so just watch out there. What's our next myth? Myth number 5. Irish whiskey is Scotch. Now, you might laugh at this and go, come on, nobody knows that. Look what I typed into Google earlier. Is Irish whiskey Scotch? Before I could even finish it, look at all the prompts. Because, do you know why? Scotch has had the most fantastic marketing campaign over the past century, and it has dominated Hollywood. It has dominated advertising. It has dominated magazines. It has dominated luxurious living, as if we're associated. It is everywhere. Like, it is absolutely everywhere. So Scotch has done this while Irish whiskey has been struggling. And it's only in the last 25 years that Irish whiskey has started to grow. But because Scotch is just any whiskey for many people is just Scotch, then Irish whiskey just becomes another Scotch for people. So, of course, this is an educated audience here. I don't need to tell you, Irish whiskey is not Scotch. You already know this. But let's not underestimate the number of people for whom Irish whiskey is Scotch. So the myth number 5 is that Irish whiskey is Scotch. I don't need to explain it, but look at that. Is Irish whiskey called Scotch? Is Irish whiskey considered Scotch? So if I'm clever now, what I need to do is I need to record little videos for each of these questions and then post them so that when somebody searches, they'll find the video that answers this, that Irish whiskey is not Scotch. And then bit by bit, over about 800 videos, we'll get rid of all these myths one by one. It'll be a tough old slog, but we'll get there in the end. We'll get there in the end. That's myth number 5 anyway. All right. If you just joined the Shebeen, you're very welcome. We're going through a number of myths, Irish whiskey myths. We're cracking them, busting them, getting rid of them because we don't want to hear them. And some of you shared these myths in our Facebook group. I've heard many of these before. And bit by bit, I think we're removing them from the conversation around Irish whiskey. If you just joined us, click the like button, click the subscribe button. That's all we ask of you, so that more people might discover a bit of Irish whiskey. I'm having a little Jaffa cake. Have you ever had a Jaffa cake? Orange chocolate. Do you know what it goes perfectly with? Shortcross whiskey. Put it on YouTube Shorts, says Mark. unmute myself. I shared last week that a good accompaniment to this whiskey was orange chocolate. There's a new one I want to add to your list, and that is After Eight mints. If you can get those, I think you get them like the likes of World Market in the United States, or York Peppermint Patty. Hear me out on this one. There's a peppermint menthol note on this that peppermint patty, as soon as you nose the peppermint patty and you nose this, you won't be able to tell the difference. So for the tasting, get hold of a few peppermint patties and get hold of some After Eights if you have them. Get hold of some chocolate orange and orange chocolate, and you won't go far wrong. Caroline says, I bet the sidecar would sell out. Just people in there screaming religious tropes out the side of the bus, like, "Rawr, Protestant whiskey." Yeah. We might unshackle it. We'll unbuckle it then at one point. Greg tried a piece of Ghirardelli's mint, and I agree. Yeah, you know, it was funny. I gave this to somebody to try the other day, and I hadn't picked up on that note. And they said, After Eights, After Eights. And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, nose it. And as soon as I connected the mint, peppermint with it, I got it immediately. So look out for it. Peppermint Paddy. Yeah, it's for St. Patrick's Day. It's a special release. It's the only time we'll ever use Paddy. Happy St. Patty's Day is only there's only a day when you enjoy York peppermint patties, of course. Johnny is having a nice big birthday pour of the Cliffs pot still. Johnny, happy birthday, buddy. And congratulations on opening that fantastic whiskey. Fantastic. Oh, my bottle's downstairs. I'd have shared it up to you. The Cliffs of Moher whiskey, which we released with JJ Corrie there last year. Fantastic. There's no religion to it. The religion is the religion of joy and love and happiness, and nothing that would in any way be determined as being divisive in any way. We're collective here. We're not individualistic or divisive. We're all very collective. All right. So happy birthday to Johnny. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. Okay. Next myth. There's not many more of these to go. I'll release you from this burden. Myth number 6. Irish whiskey is triple distilled. Scotch is double distilled. Now, this one is quite pervasive and is, again, something that I think is easy for the tour guides to talk about or throw out there, especially those that maybe are not as familiar with whiskey. Maybe they're hired to deliver tours. They're part-time. It's not their particular hobby, fascination, passion. And it's just not true. Irish whiskey can be triple distilled and Scotch whiskey can be double distilled. So back in to understand the origin of this, we have to go back to, 1825. The Spirits Act of 1825 changed the rules of how distillation can be done in Ireland, allowed for the increased size, allowed for us to reuse kind of the feints and the kind of the heads and the tails, and for larger pots, and for more efficient distillation. And triple distillation is something that, like, from 1825 we saw a lot of. Jameson's triple distillation, Powers John's Lane triple distillation. When it came to more recent history, like 1975, with the opening of New Middleton Distillery, which was only one of 2 distilleries on the island, they installed their, was it 6 pots at the time, or and again there was triple distillation there. Bushmills has always been triple distillation as well, and they've got 10 pots up there. And for the longest time in Ireland, from 1975 up until, well, really going back even further than that, most distilleries were triple distillation going way back. It wasn't until the opening of the Cooley Distillery in 1987 that double distillation was kind of reintroduced to Ireland. So by law, all whiskey must be at least double distilled, but it can be triple distilled as well. So the Irish way, from way back all the way up to 1987, was that we were just triple distilling our whiskey. Cooley Distillery was the first in modern times to double distill. Still to this day, they just use 2 stills, double distillation. But we've so many examples of double distillation in Ireland now. Waterford Distillery is double distillation. Killowen Distillery is double distillation. Boylock Distillery is double distillation. On and on. There's many of them. And we'll see more. And Redemin Estate, double distilled. Our single malt from Redemin is double distilled whiskey. Scotland would have more of a concentration of double distillations and less of triple distillations, but there are examples of triple distillation. There's even examples of quadruple distillation and more. Auchentoshan is a triple distillation distillery, but now even the likes of Octomore, and there are Octomore versions that are quadruple distilled, and there's some that are 5 and 6 times distilled. The more times you distill it, there's always the risk you're actually eliminating things you actually want in your glass. So there's a fine line there. Plus, you get to a point after so many distillations that you'll get to an alcohol by volume that is too high to anymore be considered whiskey, and it'll just be a grain spirit, and it might not even be technically legally allowed to be a spirit that's used in whiskey. So Ireland, double distillation and triple distillation. Scotland, double distillation and triple distillation. It's a myth that it's triple distillation in Ireland and double distillation in Scotland. Tom's moving to his last bit of the bottle of the Craic. All of our club whiskies are being opened tonight. The Craic, Shorecross, the Cliffs. I love to see it. This is great. I'm glad they're all being drank and enjoyed. Kilbeggan, says Kristen. That's double distillation as well, isn't it? Kilbeggan double. Bob says he wishes there was more of the Cliffs. Hoarding my bottle too like a miser. I know. Now, we could go back to JJ Corrie, because there were some of those whiskies that weren't ready at the time that were on the Cliffs. Some of them have been blended out for other projects that Louise is working on. But I know there was some whiskies we said, look, we might come back to you and talk. So we never say never. We might do something again. This is the greatest compliment we can ever get, Keith. He's our newest member. He's been a fan for a while of our group, and after sitting on the ditch for a while, just purchased the club's Shortcross repeated. Woohoo! Say hello to Keith, everyone. Welcome, Keith. We should have a little bell that we ding, ding, ling, ling, when somebody joins the club. Thanks a million, Keith. We appreciate you supporting. You're supporting our conversation about Irish whiskey. All of our contributors that we hire to bring in to produce content, videos, articles, everyone is paid. We insist on paying all of our contributors. We hero as much as we can small bottlers, small distillers, those that don't have huge marketing budgets. We also, of course, showcase the larger companies, but we love to support the whiskey industry wherever we can. So membership does that. So thank you for your support. That's right, Caroline. Irish whiskey does not need to be triple distilled. Does not. It can be double distilled. Waterford, Shorecross, Cooley whiskies, all double distilled. Jeff says, my last bottle of the story will probably be opened at his wake. Jeff, there's a danger to this statement, and that is if somebody wants this bottle bad enough, your wake might come fast. They might come after you. Hide that bottle. Hide that bottle. Or protect yourself. We have to keep an eye on you when you're on the whiskey bus. Johnny says, $20 a month for the club. Ditch the cell phone if you need it. That's it. You don't really need contact with your friends, your family, or any emergency contact with the outside world. Really, if we're being honest, what we just need is to be a member of a whiskey club. Like, honestly, I know others have said they got rid of Hulu and Amazon Prime. We're not trying to put anyone on death's door or on out on the street now. So don't be giving up anything you need in your lives to join a whiskey club. Again, life isn't that serious, but we're very, very, I'm very, very privileged to be amongst a group of people who deem that the whiskey club is worth membership. And so thank you for that. All right. What is next? I think we got one more myth. Do we? Oh, yes. Here we go. Myth number 7. We might as well end on a high, that the Scots invented whiskey. How dare anybody utter this? And if you do that in my presence, the glass of whiskey in my hand, no matter how expensive it is, might end up in your head. The Scots didn't invent whiskey at all. In fact, I don't know what the Scots ever invented. Television, I suppose. We'll give them that. John Logie Baird, 1926. Remember that from a school project. Scots didn't invent whiskey. They'll go to great lengths, many of them, to tell you that they did. However, the smart ones, the clever ones, the honest ones will go to great lengths they won't go to great lengths. They'll begrudgingly admit that the Irish did invent whiskey. How do we know that the Scots didn't invent whiskey? Well, the Scots were foolish enough to put in writing when they first started making whiskey, as were the Irish, which tended to be a little bit before that. So We can prove it, even though none of us are around at that time. Very simply, the first mention of the spirit Ishkabaha that would become whiskey in Ireland was in 1324 in a book called the Red Book of Ossory. The first mention in Scotland, 1494 in the Exchequer Rolls of Scotland. Now, I'm no mathematician, but by my calculations, there's a 170-year gap there. 170-year gap. That's a fair head start now for the Irish. And I think we're clawing back our rightful place in at the top of the world in terms of whiskey production. We don't just want to be first. We want to be the biggest. We're already the best. It's time to be the biggest again. It might happen in our lifetimes. You never know. So that's a myth. The Scots didn't invent it at all. It was the Irish. As simple as that. Let nobody tell you otherwise. Now, I don't want any argument over detail because, yes, the devil is in the detail, and we might find conflicting facts if we go too deep into the detail. Of course, these things weren't whiskey back then, were they? They were distilled spirits at best. And they contained all kinds of various grains and maybe herbs and who knows what else was in there. But they were the forefathers. They were the early ancestral spirit drinks that would evolve to become what we know today as whiskey. All right. The Irish had it. The Irish had it. Now, if we go into detail now again, I'm looking at some of the comments. You're getting awfully detail oriented. This is one of those myths where I will not be taking further questions. But there is evidence that distillation, yes, took place in Europe, in Italy, etc., and the schools in Italy. If any of you have listened to our club member podcast, the history of Irish whiskey with Fionnán O'Connor, historian, you'll have discovered that the monks didn't bring distilling to Ireland, but rather scholars who brought books back from copied manuscripts back from colleges in Italy would have brought this distillation skill, which, yes, may have taken place elsewhere, but if it did, they didn't record it. So the first recorded mention, which is a very important thing, is in Ireland, 1324. Well, Michael's got it there now for us. That explains it. All right. Do we have any more myths? Or are we through with our myths? We're through with the myths. All right. Let us. What's in your glass now? Anyone moved on? I'm still on the shore crosser. I'm too busy talking to drink it. I'm going to put on a blast of heat here. It's getting cold. Bear with me for 30 seconds. All right. What have we got? The fun is in the debate, so long as there's whiskey in the glass. Indeed, I'd agree with that. And the Scots would be great crack around this. You could have great crack with them about who invented whiskey. Now, to be fair, like the Scots dominate the whiskey world, don't they? And there's some great Scotch whiskies. I had an enjoyable one last night, actually. I had a Cardew 12-year-old single malt. Never had it before. Poured by a friend. Had it on his drink shelf. He offered me that and Powers Gold. I said, sure, I've had plenty of Powers Gold. Give me this other one here. And sipped away in it quite nicely. Mark has switched over to McConnell's Sherry Cask. That's a lovely drop. Interesting note on this McConnell's Sherry Cask, which we have here. Okay. So this is McConnell's Sherry Cask finish. It's a blended whiskey, malt and grain, and released by McConnell's Irish Whiskey. This has been released in 2 batches. The first batch made its way to the United States last year. The second batch was just released in the past couple of months. And the second batch, even though the bottles aren't labeled by the batches, so you're never going to know which batch is what until you try it. The second batch, the sherry cask is kind of dialed back a little bit. So it's a little bit lighter on the sherry cask. Some people found maybe the sherry cask too much, too wet of a sherry cask almost on the first batch. It's dialed back a little bit on the second cask. And you're going to see more perhaps evolution of this brand over the coming months and years with the new distiller Graham Miller from Ecklinville, formerly, who joined McConnell's Irish Whiskey in the past couple of months. we have a video actually tomorrow going up on storiesandsips.com from Sarah Kennedy, brand manager for McConnell's Irish Whiskey, who's going to talk to us about what we can expect from the range in the next year. So there's new single malts coming, aged single malts coming from McConnell's. I won't give it all away. It's a 6-minute video, really great interview with Sarah. We're going to put it on the website tomorrow. I'll send out a note on the social media and check your emails this week with on the newsletter, on our Mash Bill newsletter. It'll be there. So there's a nice interview there with Sarah on that. So it's a lovely drop of whiskey. Turtlenecks are good for the cold, says Jeff. They are. I'm giving my neck a bit of breathing room now for the moment. When is a sherry cask ever too much? Good question. For some people, it can be a bit like peat can be too much for some people. Sherry can be too much for others as well, I suppose. Greg is going back to the brand he started it with and pouring a Jameson 15. Good man. Is that the more recent Jameson 15 or the Millennium Jameson 15? I wonder. Let us know. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about mixed mash bills and mash bills generally, because Ireland has got new whiskies and we're all the richer for it. Okay, so how will we introduce this? Let's start by talking a little bit about this whiskey here. So this is rye and malt from Method and Madness, just released into the United States last week, released in Ireland last year. It's the first whiskey that came out of the micro distillery in Middleton, which is the small experimental distillery that is considered home to Method and Madness. And it was the first whiskey released from there. It is a limited edition, limited release, and it is what's just called simply an Irish whiskey. It doesn't fit any of the traditional categories of pot still, single malt, blend, or grain. It's just Irish whiskey. Now, what's interesting about this is that it contains a mash bill. In other words, a recipe. So a mash bill is just a recipe of what goes into the mash. And the mash is the mixture of grains and hot water that is created, that converts the starches into sugars, which are then pushed through a filter before being added into the fermentation tank, where yeast is added and the conversion of sugars into alcohol happens. So the mash is like this big kind of porridgey goo where the starches are converted to sugars. Mash is what determines the recipe, or the recipe is determined by the mash. So in Ireland, a pot still whiskey must be made from a mash of minimum 30% unmalted barley, minimum 30% malted barley, and up to 5% other grains like oats, rye, wheat, maize, for example. That's a mash bill. That's a recipe. So when Middleton makes whiskies, like pot still whiskies, traditionally Middleton makes whiskies from a mash of 60% unmalted barley, 40% malted barley. That's their mash bill. Scotland doesn't have mash bills really, because there's only one thing that they can make in their mash, and that's malt. It's just malted barley, right? They make grain whiskey separately with wheat or with corn that they blend later. They blend it into their whiskeys. So there's multiple grains in this: rye and malt. Okay, malted barley and rye grain. Those two are put into the mash together. And then once they go through the filter, they go through the fermentation process, they go through the distillation process. What comes out the other end is a spirit that after aging will become a mixed mash bill whiskey of rye and malt. That's it. It doesn't fit any category. It is just Irish whiskey. And it is remarkable because it is released by a distillery like the Middleton Distillery that has such weight in the industry that when they release something like this without being part of a category, it gets attention and maybe allows or gives permission to other distillers to experiment a little bit more. It's different than a blended whiskey that's also made from different grains. Why? So Jameson itself is made from different grains, isn't it? It's made from barley and corn, but they're all made, the whiskeys are made separately. The whiskey made from barley is a pot still whiskey made from a mixture of malted and unmalted barley. That is distilled separately. The grain whiskey made from maize or corn is distilled separately. And then they are blended together after about 4.5 years to create Jameson. So that's not a mixture of the mash bills there. Rather, it is a blending. So mixed mash bills, I want to bring to your attention and talk about them and take your questions on them and kind of work through the intricacies of them, because they're appearing more and more, and they're giving us an opportunity to buy whiskeys that are of the flavor profile that we might like the most. In other words, we're now going to be able to purchase a whiskey based on a particular mash bill that we might like the best. I think that's quite interesting to us. So this phrase mash bill is more commonly known or used in the United States because in the bourbon industry, this recipe for the mash is so important and it's so talked about. And those in the bourbon world are always asking, what's the mash bill? This every time a new bourbon comes out, what's the mash bill? Because a mash bill can be, in the bourbon world, 51% corn and 49% of whatever else you want, any other grain you want. And people want to know, what is the other grain? What are the other things that go in there? So mash bills are super important, but we haven't had to talk about them a lot in Ireland up until last year or 2 years ago, because we haven't been releasing whiskies that are of a mixed mash bill. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, in the United States, for example, here's a few examples of different mash bills. So these are brands you'll be familiar with: Jack Daniels, 80% corn, 8% rye, 12% barley, and on and on and on. They're not a million miles away from each other, but those are examples of mash bills. And in Ireland, we've typically just relied on a mash bill being the pot still. Pot still was always just Middleton for many years, wasn't it? Until Dingle Distillery came along, and then Teeling, etc. And so we kind of always had some sense, like Teeling will do a mash bill of 50% malted barley, 50% unmalted barley. But then you get the likes of Drumshanbo in County Leitrim that'll include oats in theirs. And that's really interesting. So the idea of mash bills is not a new idea. Mixed mash bills is not a new idea. And in fact, it is an important part of Irish whiskey history, because the recipes that we have today for pot still whiskey, for grain whiskey, for malt whiskey, these are not how historically whiskeys were produced. So when we talk about pot still whiskey today being the quintessential style of Irish whiskey, we're not talking about the definition of it today. We're talking about it as a style, which historically was very different than it is today. So going back to the 1800s, you had oats was the second most used grain in Ireland after unmalted barley, for example. Oats almost disappeared, or have practically disappeared from Irish whiskey completely. And so changes in everything from the economy to farming methods, agriculture, all these things affect what we produce and when. But mixed mash bills were a part of Irish whiskey history. In fact, going all the way back to when records were kept, we can see that there are different grains that were used to make our whiskeys. That all but disappeared. So when we talk about the collapse of the Irish whiskey industry in the 20th century, in the first half of the 20th century, what we don't often talk about is the collapse of flavors that we were used to drinking and enjoying. So with the new growth in the Irish whiskey industry since the 1970s and 1980s, that didn't bring those traditional flavors with it. Rather, it created new, some might argue, blander, more mellow, more mass market appeal flavors. And it's only in the last few years that brands like Killowen Distillery, Blackwater Distillery, the Micro Distillery in Middleton, Redemin Estate Distillery have started to experiment with mixed mash bills akin to how they would have been made historically. And I think that's an important distinction, that we're not talking about something this is new and revolutionary, but rather we're talking about perhaps reviving mash bills that existed historically, but today, because of technical restrictions in the law, were perhaps not pursued because they couldn't be a pot still whiskey, etc. So I know that's kind of complex and intricate, but there are so many mixed mash bills now that are coming out that it's worth us kind of diving into these a little bit. Okay. So I'll give you a couple of examples here. So these are a couple of examples. On the right-hand side is a Jameson bottle going back to this is the early 20th century. And you can see that the materials used in its manufacture are solely malting barley, wheat, and oats. That's what Jameson was. We taste so many whiskies from the early part of the 20th century. We're tasting oats. We just don't know it. Oats were a massive part of whiskey making, and they all but disappeared in terms of whiskey making in the establishment of Irish distillers who relied almost entirely on barley and maize in their production. With an occasional once or twice they experimented with wheat. Now, oats are being experimented with, I can tell you at the moment, in the likes of Middleton and others. But that just, it's important that we don't forget that Irish whiskey was always mixed mash bills up until the last 50 years. On the left-hand side there, you'll see a letter that was written in the 1950s from the surviving distilleries in Ireland to the government, talking about the makeup of their whiskies. This one is from Jameson: 80% oats, 15% or 80% barley, 15% oats, and wheat 5%. I want to talk about some of the people doing interesting mash bills in Ireland and bring them to your attention, because there's some things that are relevant to our club as well in terms of what we're doing. So some of these mash bills fit the definitions that exist out there. So when Drumshanbo releases a pot still whiskey that's malted barley, unmalted barley, and up to 5% oats, it's a mixed mash bill that fits the definition. Now, all pot stills are mixed mash bills because they're a mixture. The mash is a mixture of malted and unmalted barley. It's as simple as that. But there's additional mixed mash bills that don't fit the bill yet, like, for example, that rye and malt. Now, our good friend of Stories and Sips and of our whiskey club and of the whiskey bus, whiskey historian Fionnán O'Connor has studied vintage mash bills, mixed mash bills for a long, long time. And in 2019 and 2020, he embarked on a project to resurrect vintage mash bills in collaboration with Boann Distillery in Drogheda. And Boann Distillery, home of the Whistler, and Michael Walsh, the distiller, who was formerly of Dingle, Michael and Fionnán carved out a period of months, December 2021, January 2022, when they distilled dozens of vintage mash bills. In other words, using old mash bills that Fionnán had uncovered relating to distilleries that had been shuttered, gone out of business, or from distilleries in existence today that had used different mash bills. They recreated them using the stills in Boann Distillery. So for this period of time, all Boann did was make vintage mash bills. They then casked up the spirit and released these casks for purchase at the time, these vintage mash bill casks that were up for purchase. And I want to share with you some of the spirits that came out of this vintage mash bill experiment, because it was probably the first to really shine a light on mash bills, on vintage mash bills in the last few years. And so they released this set here. And we're going to try and open it. Here we go. Now in this set, there's a couple that are bottles that are missing because they're downstairs, but each one of these is a different mash bill. And each one of these is new make spirit, and it's before the spirit went into casks. The full distillation was, of course, casked up into different casks and set aside. Now, I'll preface this by saying we as a whiskey club actually have two of these casks. We've already purchased them. We've put them aside. They're about 2 years and 2 years old, 2 years and a month old at the moment. We'll decide what to do with them in due course. After 3 years, we might decide to leave them. We might decide to bottle them. We might decide to blend them. Who knows? We'll decide on that. But we have two of these casks, right? So that's good news. But to give you some examples, this one is mash bill number 3. And this is a replica of a style of pot still whiskey that would have been exported to the United States between 1916 and 1955 with ingredients that were based on the United States Pure Products Report. In other words, what the distiller submitted as being the mash bills. And this is made with 15% oats, 40% malt, and 45% raw barley. Another one. Find an easy one to take out here. This is mash bill number 10, and this is Edwardian rye, 1892 to 1930 mash bill. It would have been a single pot of whiskey at the time, but its mash bill is 5% rye, 15% oats, 40% malt, and 40% raw barley. Another one, here's a good one, actually. This is from Cork. So this mash bill is mash bill number 7. Very tough to see these. Is called the Wheat Boom, and it's based on the early 1800s from Bandon Distillery in Cork. Is that this one? Maybe that's not this one. This is the Wheat Boom, 1800s. 30% wheat, 30% malted barley, 40% barley. So these casks will mature, and we'll get to taste what the replica of those whiskeys used to taste like. But I share that with you as evidence of the resurgence of the interest in vintage mash bills. So who else is making mixed mash bills that are either derived from recipes of old or trying new things? Well, of course, we have Shorecross Whiskey. They have their own rye and malt. Here's a cask strength version. This was released last year. The cask strength is a tremendous whiskey, by the way. Double distilled, mixed mash bill, rye and malt. Doesn't fit any category, just Irish whiskey. Another one, of course, Method and Madness. There's another rye and malt, mixed mash bill. Here's another one, Killowen Distillery. This was Killowen's first release, called this is Baron Toul, cask number 1. This is their first ever whiskey. This is a mixed mash bill. You'll see the words mixed mash bill on the label. And what does this consist of? Well, they have a unique little insert that comes in their box. And on this insert, they tell you by the sack what their mash bill is made of. By the sack. So it says mash bill is 3 sacks of unmalted barley, 7 sacks of smoked malted barley, 2 sacks of oats, 1 sack of wheat, and 1 sack of rye. Measured by the sack, just like it used to be. Our grain is milled freshly on site during mash-in. 50% of this mash is sourced locally and 50% sourced from England and Scotland. So we're seeing more and more mixed mash bills. Now, what we're going to start to identify as whiskey enthusiasts over time is the profile of whiskey based on its mash bill. Historically, we've relied on barley. It's single malt, or it's a pot still, or it's a blend of one of those with grain, which is corn. Now we're seeing introduction of wheat, introduction of oats, introduction of rye. For example, Powers Rye, that's an unusual mash bill, 100% rye, 100% rye. So new experimentation happening, and I wanted to make sure that we addressed it and talked about it. Kristen wants to know if those Bow ensembles are new make. Yeah, that's all new make spirit. That hasn't been aged yet. That's all new make. Michael says, I think Kilbeggan's single pot still includes oats. It could well do. It could well do. I can't remember off the top of my head. Tom says, oats destroy the mills and the stills. I really wonder what is adding. Mouthfeel. Yeah, it's a lot harder to work with. Stodgy, thick consistency. Paddles get broken if you're stirring it manually. These are tough things to work with. And I know historically, Middleton used to be a lot of oats used in Middleton historically. And there's been some experimentations with them of late as well. But there's 5 grains we can use for whiskey making, all over the world. All of them must be made with 100. Whiskey anywhere in the world must be made with 100% fermentable grains, and those are rye, oats, barley, wheat, and rye. And rye, oats, barley, wheat, and corn, maize, and any combination of those that are being experimented with at the moment. So I expect we'll see more of those out there. But the point mostly I want to make is, the profiles are changing thanks to experimentation from the likes of Killowen Distillery, Redemon Estate, the Micro Distillery, changing the profiles of what Irish whiskies are. That's allowing us to bring these new flavor profiles to the market. And if you perhaps like a creamier mouthfeel, you might say, do you know what, I'm going to go for more of a wheat-based whiskey or an oats-based whiskey. Or if I like it, or sorry, a sweeter one might be wheat, or more creamy might be oats. Or if I like more of a biscuity note, I might go for a barley forward whiskey. So we're getting more information, and we're getting to try flavor profiles that we haven't tried in a long, long time, which I think is a good thing. Stacey's pouring one of those mixed mash bills right now, the Shorecross Rye Malt and Cask Strength. Rye and Malt, Cask Strength. Good stuff. So keep an eye out for the likes of Killowen Distillery, Buaylock Distillery in Donegal. We haven't talked much about them. We will again in the future. Redemption Estate Distillery. Who else is doing unusual mixed mash bills? Blackwater Distillery, all their dirt grain whiskies that we did a live stream on not too long ago. Those are all mixed mash bills derived from vintage historic recipes. The Boan whiskies that we'll see coming to market. I know, for example, like Two Stacks bought a number of those casks as well. They'll want to release those. We'll do some releasing of those in time as well. So it's a really interesting time in the old world of Irish whiskey. Aren't we lucky? All right, on to the next thing. Is that okay on mash bills? Any questions on mash bills? What's up next? All right. Next, for those of you who want to taste our Short Cross whiskey with the makers of the whiskey, please join us on March 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern. David and Fiona Boyd Armstrong, the founders of Redemption Estate Distillery in County Down, will join us at 7 p.m. Eastern for a tasting of our Short Cross single malt, peated single malt Irish whiskey right here. Keith just got his bottle. It'll be there to you in time. If you don't have a bottle yet and you want a bottle, there's still time to order it in advance of our tasting. It'll still get to you. We have very fast shipping, probably 4-day shipping at this stage, anywhere in the United States. So we do have bottles left if you want to get it before the tasting and to have one to hand and to enjoy the experience with us. What I want to do on the tasting is we'll, of course, talk about how this whiskey is made, explore the nuances of it. I'm fascinated by how we arrive at flavor. So understanding how we got from this idea by David and Fiona to eventually something in a bottle I love those journeys. I love those stories. But then I also wanted to understand how best to enjoy it and taste it. I think it's good that we've all tried it in different ways, or many of you have tried it neat, bit of water, bit of chocolate, etc. So we'll go through various ways to enjoy it on the night, and we'll talk about all aspects of it. And I think we'll just continue our education generally on Irish whiskey, because now we've got this peated education that's helping us understand flavor more. And again, I thank you for so many of you buying this whiskey. I mean, more than 250 bottles were bought in the first 48 hours. Because even though you're not all convinced yet of peat, you're trying and you're experimenting. And I think that's the goal of the club, is try things we wouldn't normally try, get access to things we wouldn't normally get access to, meet people we wouldn't normally meet. So this is just another one of those things on the journey. So the link to register for that Zoom is on our website on storiesandsipps.com. Storiesandsipps.com. Tom says he has at least 4 bottles, number 1. I doubt that now, unless we sent you blank ones and you found a pen. Technical file, Steve, has not been modified and as of yet. So right now it's sitting with the Department of Agriculture, who have it on their list to review and in consultation with the various whiskey groups, association groups. Mark assuring people that the peat and this is really good intro and not overbearing at all, very balanced. That's good to hear. I would agree with that. If you're just joining us, welcome to the Shebeen. We do this every Sunday night. We talk about Irish whiskey. We chat about Irish whiskey. We complain about prices being too expensive and that we can't get certain whiskies. And we do it together with a glass of whiskey in our hand. And you're all very welcome to the Shebeen. If you're just joining us, click the like button or the subscribe button on the YouTube channel. That's all we ask. And share it. If you have any friends who might be interested in Irish whiskey, we'd love to educate, entertain, engage them in conversation so that more people can fall in love with Irish whiskey. And that's what we do every single Sunday. That's our first tasting that we want to talk about. Next up is that I want you all to stay tuned this Friday, because this Friday we're going to announce our next tasting, our first quarterly tasting of 2023. Look at that blurred out image. What could that possibly be? You can guess all you want. I'm giving I'll say nothing about any of your guesses, but we're going to make a big announcement on Friday. And we're going to do something. So part of our whiskey club, our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club, one of the benefits of it is that you get access to, almost dropped a bit, samplings or chance to sample Irish whiskey multiple times a year in tasting kits. Last year, we sampled JJ Corrie whiskey. We sampled W.D. O'Connell. We sampled Dingle, Sleeve League. We sampled Grace O'Malley. We sampled Proclamation whiskies. We sampled Redlocks Irish whiskey. So we had some great samplings last year. We're going to do the same this year. We'll have at least 4 quarterly tastings this year. I mean, there can't be more than 4 quarterly tastings if there's only 4 quarters, but we have at least 4 tastings this year, and those involve us shipping out kits to all of you and that are members that register. And all you do is you pay the postage. You just pay the mailing cost on the whiskey. That's it. That's all you pay for. And we will then have a tasting event to go with each of those kits, where you'll be joined by the producer, the maker, the blender, the distiller, the owner, whomever it is that's part of it. The next one that we have, our first one for 2023, which is Cutting It Fine, coming into the end of the quarter, is taking place on March 27th. So we're announcing it on February 24th. We're not going to be open live for sign-ups on that day. I'm after spilling more whiskey here than I thought. We're not open for sign-ups, but we are telling you about what we're going to do. And within 2 to 3, but probably early then next week. So Friday coming, we'll announce it. And then probably by the following Tuesday, Wednesday, we'll open up registration. And we will be shipping you 3 to 4 whiskeys, most likely 4, including some very, very old whiskeys. Some very, very, very old whiskeys. And that's unusual, because normally these tasting events would be a chance to try maybe a new whiskey, maybe something that's just come to market, and we've got an opportunity to get access to some stock, and the distillery would like to do something with us. But in this case, we're going to do something different. And all of you who register will get access to a core range of whiskies. And then there will be some of you that are lucky enough, and we can't do it for everybody, but there will be some of you that get access to some really old whiskeys. So it'll be kind of a lottery system. But everyone's going to get access to the main tasting. It's going to be really fun. Main tasting with a high-profile guest. And the main tasting will be fantastic. And then there will be an added bonus for many of you. Many of you will have an added bonus in your tasting kit as well. So we'll say no more. We'll say no more. That's it for that. All right, what's next? The old whiskey bus. The old whiskey bus. We have announced last Sunday, it feels about like a year ago, that we are hosting another trip to Ireland in 2023, August 2023, 19th to the 26th of August. The whiskey bus. There's our trusty steed from our last trip. We might get the same bus this year. Who knows? We might get the same driver too. And we're going to be traveling from Dublin to Cork and back. And we announced this last week, and we have a waiting list that's open at the moment for our whiskey bus. So for those of you who want to get on that waiting list, you can go to our website, Stories and Sips. Actually, let me find the link, the direct link, because I think it's just thewhiskeybus.com. We'll get you there. See if it does. No, it doesn't. Okay, let me put the link in here. If you want to get on our waiting list or see our announcement, you can see. There's the link. I put in the comments there. If you want to get on the waiting list, we should link to that from the homepage. I'll do that tomorrow as well, for those of you who want to join. For those of you who are waiting on the next step, so I see some of you in the comments here who are part of our next trip. We sold out very quickly. The next steps are that you will receive a link this week for your first deposit that'll hold your place. You've already held your place by virtue of being either first in line or part of our bus last year. But now we're collecting the monies, the first monies, because hotels are asking us the same thing. So we'll send you out a link. It'll be for $1,050 per person. And each of those emails will go out between Monday and Wednesday. So keep an eye out for those. And if you need more time to pay, let us know. We'll do our best to help you. that's the next step with that. We're finalizing dates at the moment, trying to get everything coordinated for our action-packed trip that includes Middleton Distillery, Clonakilty Distillery, Bushmills on a boat. What's interesting is since we have launched our itinerary, other whiskey brands have come forward to offer suggestions and ideas on how they might get involved, to which we have welcomed them into the fold and said, have at it, let's do it. So you'll see some more surprises along the way, and most of these will be unannounced, but you might see them on your social media feed from people on our whiskey bus in August. We've also had, interestingly, like the Irish whiskey industry, very friendly, very cooperative, but wow, is it competitive? We've had one distillery see what we were doing and said, hold on a second, I can't let them do that. Can I do something that beats what they're doing? I said, you can do whatever you want. Yeah, if we can fit it in and it works, let's do it. So there could be some other things that will pop up, but we won't wear you all out. We won't wear you out. We'll give you some time to do what you need to do around the place as well. Some of you got socks on one of our last tastings. Yeah, that's true. The Red Lock socks. I'm looking for more swag from brands for some of our things as well. I know you like swag, but we're hoping very quickly now after this tasting to announce our next one. I think we have solved some logistical challenges. So the quarterly tasting kits are a logistical nightmare. The full bottles are a bit easier, but I would like to do more multi-kits. In other words, like not just one brand or one distillery in a kit, but maybe 3 or 2 if we can. There'll be opportunities for both sides of it. Sometimes we'll have an entire takeover if there's interesting range to go through. But I think we've got a solution on the whiskey kit shipping side of things, which hopefully will work for everybody. So we'll keep the price low. So when it comes to the tasting kits, just going back to that really quick, because I see some of you mentioning it, $20-$25 is probably the cap on how much we charge for shipping, and that's just FedEx alcohol or DHL alcohol shipping, and that's your cost, right? That's in addition to your monthly cost. Now, we'll have some opportunities during the year where a distillery or a brand might come to us and say, look, I have an opportunity for 100 kits, and we'll run some lotteries, but we'll open up always at least 4 that everyone has access to. This is one of them coming up, so hopefully we should get a full house of that. Cheryl would like glassware in her kits. I'd say you'll take anything that's free. I'd say we can throw in a few stones from the beach from Ireland there. You take them as well. That's it. I think that's it for the old slides. That's our whiskey bus covered. Our mix mash bills, our myths, our next club tasting, our quarterly kit tasting. And what else is happening? Oh, yes. Who knows, in the next, very soon, according to Middleton Very Rare, you might see the 2023 release coming out and some interesting packaging that I think you'll be excited about when that comes out as well. And we are also working on, I almost was wearing another jacket earlier on that said Middleton Very Rare and Gormley's Pub in it, because we are working on a festival of Middleton whiskies for 2023 in Ohio that covers 3 cities, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Columbus, with events in every city, different times. So almost like a week long, maybe 1-2 nights in each city, leading up to a finale gala event in Cleveland. So we're in the early stages of planning that to line up with the tasting of Middleton Very Rare Silent Distillery Chapter 4, which is being released in April this year. 48-year-old whiskey. They're getting older and older. So we're working on that as well. And then we are working on more in-person events in May. First week of May is, I can't give you precise dates, but just know that I'm working on the first week of May, Friday-ish, like a Friday if I can, because I know it's tough for some of you to get away midweek. Friday in New York, Friday in May in New York. So the New York is the center in terms of where we can get to realistically and do things. We've got great support there, and brands are able to connect with us there. So we'll do some in-person events in New York again in May. Thanks to everyone who came out to our last events, and we'll have some events there for those who want to do things in person. Again, I wish I could get to every city in the US, and I know loads of you on the West Coast. It's not always possible, but we'll do what we can. Meet you halfway. Meet you halfway. Early May, anyway. Anybody got whiskey plans for St. Patrick's Day, March 17th? Where are you going to be? What are you going to be doing? Matt, we'll have to appoint you or connect you with like Stacy and all the great group down there in Ohio, in the Midwest. You got to fly the flag for Irish whiskey down there. Bourbon country. You're surrounded. That gives you an opportunity to introduce something different. Cheryl's going to be in the Chicago St. Paddy's Day Parade. Tom's in Washington, D.C. Oh, no, he says Washington, D.C. is better located. We might, I'd like to do something in D.C., but we are finding that the roads are leading to New York. And sure, it's only a train trip away. A couple of hours in the train, you'll be in New York. Amy's hanging in the pub. No driving necessary. Good idea. Good idea. Kristen's going to be working the bar. Try not to cry from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. 12 p.m. or 12 a.m.? Do you not want to be working? No, you'd rather be celebrating. Johnny, game day decision in New York City. Louise McGran could be in Indianapolis for St. Patrick's Day. Bob will be in Winter Park, Florida. Kevin talking about the Dead Rabbit in Austin next year. Yeah, so Dead Rabbit in Austin aiming for an opening this year. Later this year. We'd like to do some things with them, wouldn't we? We'd like to do more with the Dead Rabbit. Maybe we can do some things with the Dead Rabbit in Austin as well. Thank you for those of you putting in your orders. I see more orders come in for the whiskey for our Stories and Sips Shortcross whiskey. Fair play to you. I'm going to put the link up here for those of you who do want to purchase and can't find the link. That's the whiskey bus. Okay. Club Whiskies. All right. Okay, I'll put this link in here. Old Town, Virginia says, Tom, would be a good place for us to do something in Murphy's. I love Old Town, Virginia. Spent a lot of time there years ago. Slam Dunk Stories and Sips location. All right. Well, I mean, the East Coast is our place, so we might we look into it. We look into it. We'd have to be guaranteed a crew. So we'd need support. I know in New York we can get a good crowd together. Lots of New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, tri-state area support there. Tom, if you can convince me that we can get a crowd in DC. We don't have a huge concentration of members in DC, I'll tell you that. Time to come to Boston, says Bob. We should come to Boston too. We should come to Boston. I do have a potential event in that neck of the woods in September, like a charity fundraiser I'm doing for another charity. I might be there in September. So we'll keep whenever I'm in the States, we'll try and do events around things that pop up. There was something else I wanted to share with you. Oh, yes. So if you're new to the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club, you might not know that we have a lot of video content archived on our website. We have a lot of interviews. We have a lot of articles. We have a lot of behind the scenes tours. All of our events that we've ever hosted virtually are all archived on our website. And I want to just take 5 seconds to share with you just where you find things on the website, because we're going to be adding a lot more over the coming this week and next week. We've already recorded great interviews with Shane McCarthy from Two Stacks Irish Whiskey, sharing the story of the Dram in the Can, how it came to be, how it was made, the marketing of it, the building of the business around it. Really great interview. For those of you who want to go deep on Irish whiskey, interview with Shane McCarthy. We've got a great chat with Dahi O'Connell from WD O'Connell Whiskey Merchants, one of our stops in our whiskey bus. Mark McLaughlin from the Dead Rabbit, and who's been on Stories and Sips for a number of times. He's the director of Irish whiskey for the Dead Rabbit now. Mark conducted those interviews for us, did a great job of it. We're going to publish those on our website, but I want you to know where you can find them, because there's so much on our website that it does become quite a challenge to find everything. So I'm going to share with you our website here. Now, this is storiesandsips.com that you see on your screen. You go bigger screen here. All right. So at the top, you'll see a slider. And if you slide down, you'll see some of the more recent articles. And here's the fascinating origin of Irish whiskey's age and ABV. There's a behind the scenes tour of the McConnell's Irish Whiskey Crumlin Road Jail, interview with Sarah Kennedy on the history of McConnell's. We have the replay of our Meet the Maker event with Eric Ryan, replay of our Meet the Maker with Fiona and David Boyd Armstrong. You want an interview with a chat with Deirdre O'Carroll, who was responsible for putting together the new Jameson single pot still. That's all in there. So those are just the most recent things. But if you click up here in the Stillhouse, up on the menu on the top here, the Stillhouse is where you'll find different categories: Irish Whiskey History 101. But you scroll down here, you're going to find some incredibly insightful chats, interviews, tours that you might have missed. So, for example, Jameson's Pot Still Whiskey History, that's an interview with Carol Quinn, the archivist from the Middleton Distillery. Do you want to tour Clonakilty Distillery's warehouse with their master distiller, Oisin Mulcahy? Click on in there, all on video, all available to you to watch anytime you want. Do you want to watch our 7-part podcast or listen to our 7-part podcast series, History of Irish Whiskey? It's all inside the Whiskey Club, all inside the Stillhouse. That's a great episode, a great series with Fionnán O'Connor, Irish whiskey historian. Probably 5 hours of no advertising, just content, unbelievable knowledge of 800 years of Irish whiskey over 7 episodes. You want to tour the Two Stacks Irish Whiskey headquarters? That's all in there. And then you click to the next page and you'll see just how much is in here when we go all the way back. For example, if I scroll down here, you want to tour the Middleton Stillhouse, the Garden Stillhouse. They don't allow cameras in there normally. Kevin O'Gorman, master distiller, brought us in there with the camera, gave us a tour of the Stillhouse where Redbreast, Jameson, Powers, they're all made. You want to tour the warehouse complex? Jump on in there. Kevin O'Gorman, 20-minute tour of the warehouse complex. Unbelievable insights into bourbon casks, sherry casks, etc. Scroll on. I mean, this keeps going on and on. We got great articles on all the different types of barrels, differences between Irish, Scotch, and American whiskies. So look, it gives you some sense of what content is going in here. Then you scroll over to the Whiskey Club on the right-hand side, and all of these drop-down areas here have content in them. So Meet the Maker events. You want to go back and watch any of the replays with everybody from Maurice O'Connell from Wayward Irish Spirits to Jackie McGarry and Mark McLaughlin from the Dead Rabbit. That's in there. Cocktail Masterclass. You want to go live to the Middleton Distillery at 12 o'clock at night into Warehouse A2, where they store the oldest casks in the distillery. Just me and Kevin O'Gorman alone in the distillery at 12 o'clock at night, streaming live. That's all in there, replay. Meet the founders of the Talnua Distillery in Colorado, making Irish-style whiskey, all in here. So I share those because it's often overlooked just how much content we have, and there's more coming. So it's part of your membership to get access to all that stuff. We're creating more of it. If you don't want it, tell us and we won't make it. But we have got some good feedback that it helps people just get deeper into the world of Irish whiskey. So it's all in there. Troy says there should be a Stories and Sips Rambling in collaboration. Troy, we'll have to do something. We're all ears. I'll see you when you get to Ireland. We'll have a chat. Oh, we could do Daniel O'Connell's, yeah. There you go. Daniel O'Connell's, we did an event with Daniel O'Connell's and Clonakilty Distillery back in, I think it was halfway to St. Patrick's Day 2020. We did that during lockdown, during COVID. I remember we did this. And Daniel O'Connell's is one of the stops. The woman from Cork running it, isn't it? Stacey says, please hit the like button and keep this great crack coming. Yeah, I know like or a share would be lovely. I know subscribe, cost you nothing. Only the old tap of the finger. Johnny loves going back to the old lock-ins. Yeah. Then you go to our YouTube channel and you click back on the videos. We've got hundreds of videos on our YouTube channel. 63 weeks of lock-ins, old videos. If you scroll back far enough, you'll see much younger looking me with no gray hair and much more put together recording and streaming and recording videos from the house in Columbus, Ohio back in the day. So it's all there on the YouTube channel. So plenty of Irish whiskey content anyway, and more coming. Good night, Dee. Good night, Greg. Thanks for joining us. So Sinead, any questions? What have we missed? Anything at all? Ask me anything. I might not be able to answer it. Otherwise, I think we're almost at the end. Jeff Cleveland and Tom, if you guys can help get 20 odd people together, 30 preferably, a favorable location, we can get some whiskey brands to maybe do a tasting in DC. Matt says, this is my first Shebeen. Excellent program. I had fun talking with everyone. Good man. Great to hear, Matt. We are very welcome and we're delighted to have you. Thanks a million and good luck in your travels. We only talk about one whiskey here. That's Irish whiskey every week. I know nothing about Canadian whiskey, really, bourbon or Scotch, that I could talk anything about. Many of you now in the audience will be far more knowledgeable on those things. So I focus all the efforts on Irish whiskey, and we do it every Sunday. And if there's news to share, we'll share it. So over the next week, I'll be collecting any news that breaks from the world of Irish whiskey. I'll share it with you next Sunday night, and we'll talk some more. So between now and then, you'll see the announcement of our next club quarterly tasting. You'll see, what else will you see this week coming? You'll see some new interviews and videos and coming to our Stories and Sips website. And again, if you're interested in purchasing a bottle of our Short Cross whiskey, you know where to go for that as well. Shin A, folks. I think that's it. Shin A. Stacey said, I joined late. Can you start over? I cannot. I'll be broken man. I'll be a broken man. See, how many bottles are we down to of our Short Cross whiskey? 43 bottles left. And I know those who really enjoy this whiskey will snap those up. So I give them another month and they'll all be gone. They'll all be gone. All right. Great show, everyone. Thanks a million. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. We'll plan lots more. It's all in planning. All in planning. Keep drinking Irish whiskey. Share it with your friends and share the stories of what we're doing here. Help people join our club, and we'll keep talking about it. We'll keep drinking it. So thanks for a good Sunday night. Look forward to chatting to you all during the week, and excited to get your feedback on our next big club tasting that's happening in March that we'll announce this Friday. All right. Slaunch, everybody. Cheers. We'll talk to you soon. All the best.